Hello and welcome back to the Professional Ruby on Rails Developer course. At the end of the last lesson, I left you with an exercise to complete the blog app from the guides at rubyonrails.org website. And I hope you were able to complete it in its entirety. If not, don't worry, we'll clone a fully functioning version of this blog app from the GitHub repository of this course and see how the MVC structure works in Rails. So what is MVC? MVC stands for Model View Controller. The basic idea is to enforce a separation between the business logic and the graphical user interface, also known as GUI, of your application. For web applications, the GUI is the browser, which is where the view part of MVC comes into play. Let's explore the diagram a bit more detail. The user, when they issue a request, uses the browser to issue a request for a link. Your Rails application then receives this request and routes it to the appropriate controller. The corresponding action in the controller invokes the model to retrieve or post information. The model follows this command and communicates with the database. The model then returns this information to the controller. If it's a retrieve request, the controller captures the information in an instance variable, which is passed to the view. The view uses embedded Ruby to render the page as HTML. Now let's see this in action. There was a short video in between the previous lesson and this one to create your GitHub account. I hope you signed up because now you're not only going to view the MVC pattern using the blog app, but you're going to create your own repository in GitHub for this blog application. And then you're going to push the code from your local environment to your repository. If you have not signed up for GitHub as yet, I'd recommend pausing this video, going to the previous video, and creating a GitHub account. Okay, great. Now that you have a GitHub account, let's talk about the blog app. If you have not completed the blog app, don't worry, we'll clone an existing working blog app that I created for this course using Git and following the step-by-step directions from the Getting Started guide. We'll then create a repository for our app in our GitHub account and push our code to the repository for our first commit on GitHub. Now I'm going to the GitHub account for this course and find the repository. So here it is. There's the blog app. Okay, to clone this app, we need the URL. So the URL can be found here. So if you go to this GitHub repository, github.com/railsudemycourse/blog, and then go to the blog app, there is the cloning URL. So click on that and copy it. Then you go back to your command line. Now, one thing I would like to add here is this is where we're keeping all of our apps, our test apps and everything. And if you created the blog app using directions from the Rails guides, you already have a blog app here. So we don't want to clone the blog app into this directory. We want to create a Rails project directory, and then we'll clone the app there. So how do we do that? First, we're in the blog app here. Confirm by typing that in. I want to move one directory up, and then I want to create a directory for Rails project. Now, I have a test directory here already, and I believe it's empty. Oh, it has a file. So let me just go ahead and rename this test directory to Rails project. How do we do that? We do that by typing in mv for move, test directory. That's the directory name you want to change, and then type in Rails_projects for what you want to rename it to, and then hit return. You see that the test directory has disappeared. Now it's called Rails project. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Rails projects. I want to delete this file. Okay, so I have an empty directory. I'm going to clone our blog app here. So how do we clone it? Remember, we copied the URL from our GitHub repo for this app. We type in git clone and then the address and then hit return. And that's it. It cloned the app. How do we know that? Type in ls at this time and you'll see a blog app here. Now let me navigate to this. There's the blog app. Now this says master because we used git to download the app or clone the app from the repository. So this actually comes with a git repository already. We'll discuss more details of that later on. Let me clear this up a little bit. Okay, so one thing I want to do before moving forward is if you type in git remote -v, it shows that your origin is pointing to the Rails Udemy course blog app. We don't want to point it to this. We want to point it to your own GitHub repository for this application, which we'll create in the next few steps. But first, I want to remove this origin link. So how do I do that? Type in git remote rm for remove origin. Now if I type in git remote -v, we see that this has disappeared. This is no longer there. So this is no longer pointing to the Rails Udemy courses GitHub repository for this blog app. Okay, so now we have a fully working app over here that we downloaded, that we cloned. So we want to run the Rails server. But before we do that, we have to create the database tables. And to do that in the local environment, you type in rake db :migrate. Okay, so we see that it created the articles table and the comments table. Great. So now let's run our Rails server. Rails server HP. If you're working locally, here you can just type in Rails server or Rails S. Okay, so our code is running. Let's navigate to this link. Let's see. Okay, there's the app. So I'm going to click here. It says listing articles. Great. Now, if you followed through the guide for this blog app, towards the end, there's some basic HTTP authentication. So that's probably what's going to come up if I click on this. Oh no, I already entered this before. That's great. But if you're having trouble with that, the username would most likely be MH and the password would be secret. And how can I tell that? If you go to the application in Rails projects, then the blog app, if you go to app and then controllers, then articles controller, right on top, you'll see the HTTP basic authenticate with and the name MH and then password secret. It's a very basic authentication, but it was part of the guide, so it's there. For me, I had already logged in before, so MH and password and secret were actually stored in my browser cache. All right, so let's test out the application. I'm going to type in first article testing. Okay, seems to be working. I'm going to type in a comment for it. All right, I'm going to go back to it. Okay, so the listing articles is working. Let me try editing this article. First article edited, testing. Okay, that seems to be working. So hit back again. Let's create a new article. Okay, so now I'm going to check the destroy link. Sure, yep. Okay, so that seems to be working as well. All right, so now let's go back to our application. And I want to open up the README file for this. So if I go here, okay, there it is. In the README file on top, I want you to edit this, but before you do that, let's see if we're in the right application in this terminal. Okay, we're not. We're in the old blog app, so we're going to navigate out of it. Then